Across the country, people are dying because of the fuel crisis.
Everyone knows when oil no longer flows through the strait, things get bad. But this closure of the Strait of Hormuz is way worse than you think. An entire civilization could die.
What's the most overlooked impact of this disruption? What are the knock-on effects that we're not yet fully grasping?
I think the number one is fertilizer, because the Gulf was a source of 1/3 of the world's traded fertilizer. And this is hit during planting season. In many parts of the world, it's either driven up prices or it simply isn't there. So I'd put that as number one.
No fertilizer. No food supply. This energy starvation affects not just travel, but every level of human survival. Developing economies from the Philippines and India to Pakistan and Kenya are suddenly left with only days of fuel reserves. Today, we'll examine 5 countries in detail. Each one reveals something about the state of the global chessboard, but the country that comes out on top of all this might just surprise you. The Philippines. Whenever a global crisis strikes, this island nation faces an immediate survival countdown. In fact, it was the first country in the world to declare a national energy emergency.
Of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has declared a state of national energy emergency.
They import 98% of their crude oil directly from the Middle East. By law, domestic oil companies are only required to hold a tiny emergency buffer. The total survival window for the entire country is just 45 days. Once those commercial reserves dry up, the fuel pumps go completely cold. During a major supply shock, retail prices reach historic breaking points. Diesel fuel easily rocketed past 130 Philippine pesos per liter. On paper, that looks like just over $2 American. But spending $20 to fill up a small motorcycle equals a full day's wages. Hundreds of independent fuel stations shut their pumps without warning. Local owners cannot afford the upfront cost to fill their own storage tanks. The entire domestic transportation network suffers an immediate, painful paralysis. Taxi and public transportation drivers cannot make a profit when fuel costs more than passenger fares.
Almost all of our earnings this time goes to buy gasoline. Back then we used to bring home 1,000 pesos, but only 300 pesos now. This gas crisis is really a big loss to our livelihood.
Drivers of the iconic Philippine jeepney fleets were forced to launch massive strikes. Moving goods is uniquely difficult because this country is a vast archipelago. Connecting thousands of separate islands relies entirely on maritime shipping lines. But soaring marine fuel costs force cargo operators to ground their vessels. Entire island communities are suddenly cut off from the mainland. Up in the sky, national airlines face the exact same crushing pressure. Major carriers like Philippine Airlines and Cebu Pacific suspend unprofitable domestic routes entirely. The vital tourism industry is completely crippled by the lack of flights. The entire national transport network breaks apart piece by piece. No fuel, no transportation, no food distribution. Meanwhile, in Cuba, the global energy shockwave hits the Caribbean's fragile shores.
Tonight, no medicine, no power, and patients who may never get treated.
Cuba exists under a constant state of intense worry from bigger political influences. When trade blockades tighten, this isolated island faces an immediate survival threat. The loss of subsidized oil shipments from foreign allies cuts off its primary life support. Without a steady supply of external fuel, the national electrical grid enters near total collapse. Major cities are routinely plunged into brutal 22-hour blackouts every single day. Over 80% of the island's water pumping equipment relies entirely on the electrical grid. Prolonged power outages leave millions of citizens without running water or proper hygiene. The universal healthcare system enters a phase of complete paralysis. It triggered an operational disaster far worse than the early days of the pandemic. During COVID, the world only lacked masks and beds, but power grids remained stable. This time, large municipal hospitals are forced to operate on minimal, unstable power grids. Intensive care units and emergency rooms face catastrophic daily disruptions. Life-saving medical machines go completely dark during the long outages. Temperature-sensitive medications, blood products, and vaccines spoil inside warm refrigerators. This isn't just a crisis of shipping lanes and oil barrels. It is the sound of hospital alarms falling silent in the dark, while doctors fight to save lives with flashlights. The state closes schools and universities to save energy. The state's essential food rationing system completely buckles under the pressure. Vulnerable families face acute, immediate food shortages in cities. The line between absolute control and total societal collapse completely vanishes. No electricity, no safe drinking water. This intense energy starvation has targeted basic human survival. India, a country home to 1.5 billion people, is hit hard by this massive supply shock. It imports a staggering 88% of its total oil supply, and half of that comes through the Strait of Hormuz. But the scariest impact is not the skyrocketing price of oil. It's a shortage that is affecting almost every kitchen in the country. Most families rely on LPG to power their gas burners. Yet, India holds virtually zero strategic emergency reserves for the gas. Worse, nearly 90% of gas supplies come directly from the Middle East. The shortage is directly threatening the food security of billions of people. Panic buying is now taking hold. Wealthier households are scrambling for induction stoves running on electricity, but those same stoves require energy from a grid that's already strained. Behind the cold economic data lie billions of dark kitchens, where mothers stare at empty stoves, wondering how to feed their children tomorrow. Energy prices are skyrocketing, and the nation's remaining fuel stockpiles are on a countdown. Top diplomats are begging trade partners for help. Meanwhile, the government is appealing to the public to conserve fuel. The reality is, as long as the strait is closed, no help is on its way. In East Africa, Kenya has long been seen as the region's powerhouse. But the economic shockwave is also hitting the least developed countries the most, as Kenya relies on its cash crop exports. And exports? They need reliable fuel and shipping routes. Kenya's biggest export crop is cut flowers.
Limited cargo space and high charter costs have made exports to key markets in Europe increasingly unviable. Growers say the sector's heavy dependence on Middle Eastern airline hubs has left it vulnerable to disruptions.
Big, expensive, heavy refrigerated trucks are needed to transport them. With international carriers cutting routes and fuel, strict delivery timelines are at risk. This is a disaster Africa can hardly afford. For local smallholder farmers, a withered flower crop isn't just a business loss. It is the look of their children's school fees vanishing and their family's safety net completely tearing apart. Although a handful of African nations may benefit from higher prices, like Nigeria, which exports fuel, others are affected by the instability this liquid gold brings and are dealing with rebel groups fighting for control of the resources. As fields dry up and rebel violence flares over precious resources, ordinary families are forced to trade their livelihoods for survival, running from a conflict they didn't cause. But perhaps no nation gets such a poisoned chalice as China. See, while the world scrambles to survive, Beijing sees a massive strategic window. A distant war directs Western attention. US and allied weaponry is being burned through fast, both in Russia and Iran. Now, the US has pulled assets straight out of the South China Sea, Japan, and South Korea. For China, looking across the water at Taiwan, this could be their moment. But this political opening hides a brutal economic nightmare. China lacks strong domestic oil reserves. Nearly half of their crude imports transit the narrow Strait of Hormuz. When that choke point freezes, a 104-day countdown clock starts ticking. China's economy is already slowing, with its housing market showing signs of breaking. Now fuel concerns are adding to the issue. The odd visit of Donald Trump to Beijing also had unexpected results. Although no wholesale deal to end the trade war was agreed, China did agree to buy US oil.
They've agreed they want to buy oil from the United States.
That is a historic milestone, one that is completely at odds with their stated aim of retaking US ally Taiwan. Beyond the high-stakes chess moves of superpowers, millions of young soldiers and terrified civilians look across the dark waters of the Taiwan Strait, knowing a single miscalculation will tear their families apart forever. The final poison pill is that for years, Chinese propaganda claimed Western military might was in decline. However, the raw power of US campaigns in Venezuela and Iran have completely upended that assumption. They've proven the West can still call geopolitical bluffs, but it gets worse for China. China is supposed to be an Iranian ally, but when the shooting started, they were nowhere to be seen. This calculated coldness shows the strict limits of their security promises. It signals to their global partners that, with China, they are actually on their own. The dragon remains a purely economic actor, reliant on the US while the world burns. These are just 5 countries, but the reality is the whole world is affected. Because while we've talked about the developing nations that will suffer the most, they're not alone in being affected. Much more developed countries like the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait do not grow their own food. They rely on the 21-mile choke point for 80% of their daily food. For countries like Japan and South Korea, this is an immediate power shock. They changed their biggest factories to use gas for clean energy. Still, their power grids are facing sudden blackouts. Lights are quietly going out on global manufacturing. Europe's heavy manufacturing sector has also been forced into emergency survival mode. The prolonged closure, economists warned, could lead to permanent deindustrialization in energy-intensive sectors as companies relocate production out of Europe entirely. But here's where it gets strange. There is actually a country that seems to be benefiting from this whole crisis: the United States of America. That's because the US is a massive exporter of the three biggest things this crisis affects: oil, gas, and food. It also extracts enough oil to power its own economy. So what does a world look like with the US ascending while everyone else struggles? That remains to be seen. But what doesn't change is the human cost. Everywhere, lives disrupted. Many places, lives ended. Billions struggling against inflation. Billions fighting for food once more. Because while the modern world feels giant, high-tech, and totally unstoppable, that 21-mile stretch of water is critical to the entire human project. Modern society is a house of cards, one built on free trade, globalization, and open waterways. One where without that a single superpower could rise once more. While the rest of the planet fights to survive, how long could your own city survive if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed? Let's have a real talk in the comments below. Don't miss out on next week's breakdown. Hit that bell.